Robert Connolly, Eric Bana, thanks so much for talking to us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Lovely to chat to you.
What's the most daunting challenge of directing a sequel to a movie that was so loved that it was the most successful independent movie of the past 5 years? What's that like?
The challenge, I think, is meeting people's expectations because they've seen the first film and there's things they loved, but also surprising people with something new. You know, people want to see this detective back, solving crimes, doing the things he did in The Dry, but you also want to give the audience a completely new experience. So making sure it doesn't feel like a rinse and repeat, which was, obviously Jane Harper's book gave us a great foundation for that because it's a completely different world that it's set in.
Well, Jane Harper said that you really nailed the character of Aaron Falk.
Thank God for that.
It would have been a problem for you, I suppose. How would you describe him?
I'd describe him as someone who is, I wouldn't say earnest, but I'd say there's a real moral streak to what he's trying to do. And I think he's, as well as trying to solve crimes, I think there is an inner battle within Aaron that is conclusive with his work. It's just running parallel. And I think that's what audiences picked up on with The Dry. And that kind of dual storyline helps us kind of map that out, and both emotionally and in terms of the storyline.
Because often coppers in films or television are, either there's some sort of corruption sense or there's some sort of professional trauma that they're sort of dealing with. But in his case, it's really about, certainly in the first movie and to some extent the second, either about compromise or internal information from his own life, which is a bit of a different take on a police character, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't often get to see, and I guess we have the advantage of concentrating on one central police character, so we can explore his backstory a bit more, whereas I guess if you're watching a traditional drama where you're dealing with a room full of officers, we don't have the same amount of time to in depth go into people's background and how it affects how they do their police work and so forth. So Jane does a great job of laying the foundations for us, and it was our job to just go in and try and elevate that as much as we can while still, staying true to the original source material.
Well, perhaps the other biggest character in both movies is the landscape, and in the first movie, there's stunning cinematography of those, really dry, flat landscapes, and now you've moved into the rainforest. How do you actually incorporate that as part of the story, as making it part of the character?
Oh, it's so exciting that these films take Australian audiences into parts of Australia that we love and are familiar with but don't see on the big screen. And you're right, on The Dry, for us living out in Warwick Nabil, filming in the Mallee and the Wimmera was incredible, living in regional Australia. But with Force of Nature, it takes us into the incredible, the Otways, the Dandenong Ranges, Latrobe Valley, the Yarra Valley, all this incredible kind of ancient forests in Victoria. And as a filmmaker, I think often people mistakenly think that world is very scrubby, but this is ancient, subtropical rainforest in the heart of winter. So, and the gift of cinema is that we can take a camera in there, take actors in there, and depict a world that is rarely seen this way. I have a great love and affection for the Australian bush, and in some ways the film is a love letter to that world.
What about you, Eric? I mean, you're notoriously known as a bit of a rev head, but have you had much of a love affair with the bush? I mean, you ever bushwalk, to get camping and into leeches and things?
Yeah, I use a motorbike to get into the bush, absolutely. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the Australian bush in Victoria and New South Wales, so a lot of those areas I'm very familiar with and have a deep affection for. And we're really lucky. We're a size of production that we're able to get access to parts of Victoria that a big American production just wouldn't have got access to. And I guess that was part reputation, part being local, and also, we presented a compelling model as to how we would film and be really low impact. And it's a credit to the crew because it meant having a really tiny amount of physical equipment in those locations and a lot of hand carrying of equipment. A torchlight first thing in the morning and the cast coming in and just bearing the brunt of the conditions all day long until sunset. So everyone worked really, really hard to get what you see on screen. and we're really, really proud of that.
I suppose that's one of the interesting questions. I mean, would an American production take that approach? I mean, how different is it working in an Australian production like this compared to, the big Hollywood?
I guess some would. A big American production just couldn't. There'd be just too much infrastructure around the cast and crew, particularly if you're dealing with big actors. So we just really needed to assemble a cast and crew who are prepared to rough it, basically. And take that challenge on board. And it's a relief, to be honest, because filming in a studio, it's just can be mind-numbing. And being on location and shooting day for day, it brings a particular kind of energy where the camera comes out at first light and the camera's going in the box when the sun goes down, and there's an energy and a pace that comes from that, and a creative energy that comes from that you don't get in the studio with lights where you feel like you're in a casino, basically.
You had to delay the release of the film because of the actors' strike in the US. But I suppose I also wonder, we've come out of this really traumatic time for everybody, including the industry, because of COVID. How did the filming of this movie fit in with COVID, and how did it feel to be out there again?
It was really exciting to be making another film with a crew and to be collaborating. I mean, film is such a collaborative medium, so you have 75, 100 people all gathering together to make the film. And I think we were really lucky. The Dry came out just when cinemas were opening up, and then Eric and I were able to make the film in WA Blueback from Tim Winton's book. But there was huge quarantine issues there in WA. But Force of Nature was probably our first film really on the other side of it. And I definitely felt a kind of sense of joy at the adventure of making a film again, and a sense that we've protected this industry. We're still here because there was a moment there where people thought that it wouldn't come out the other side, that cinemas would be closed forever, that film production would kind of shrink forever. And that didn't happen, which I think speaks probably to our national kind of love of going to the movies.
In fact, COVID sort of has transformed the industry, I think, here. So many people came to Australia because they could make movies safely during COVID. Have you noticed much of a change in the capacities of the industry in a production sense?
Yeah, I think that the battle is still there as an independent Australian filmmaker to make sure that we realise how important it is to tell Australian stories here. I think it's great that we have international work filming here, and it employs crew and it gives opportunities to people. But my career has also been defined, I guess, by people standing in the face of that and saying, let's make films like The Dry for Australian audiences, and Australians love them. And that's what's amazing about the areas we filmed in, that we're filming them as they are. We're not trying to fake them for somewhere else in the world. So while I'm happy and excited for that international work here, I think, the danger is always that we're complacent, and Australians, as we know, love our national cinema. It's protected, it's part of our cultural story, and Force of Nature is another piece of that. So, yeah.
Presents a real challenge. I mean, when we're putting a crew together for something like The Dry or Force of Nature, we're asking people to take on 8-9 weeks' work and give up on potentially 4 or 5 months' work on a large-scale American production. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do, and that's basically what we're competing against as Australian filmmakers. So we're relying on people's goodwill, we're relying on their sense of wanting to do something different and work with people who are at the coalface and trying to make the best possible product, and they're not just being run by a few executives who are going to hop on the plane and disappear, So it is a real challenge, and it does affect us because it doesn't feel like a fair fight in a lot of ways.
Well, obviously the issue of local content in streaming is at play here, but I mean, is there much of a difference for you, given that you can work more or less anywhere in the world you'd want, I imagine, in the sorts of decisions you can take about working in Australia versus working overseas as a result of those changes?
I've never been really dogmatic about it. I've never felt like I have a huge sense of responsibility to do a kind of certain quota of Australian films. I've always felt that the best possible thing for me to do when I do an Australian film is that it be as great as it can possibly be, and then that's the best calling card. And to then take that film and hope that we get sales overseas and showcase Australian film overseas. And whilst we love it when it works for the local audience, the real bang for buck is when those films can travel and overseas audiences can be presented with the best quality Australian film, and it helps the next Australian film get made, it helps the next Australian film get distributed, and how's this for a novel idea? They get to hear Australian accents on screen, because apparently Australians don't exist anywhere else in cinema.
Australians don't exist anywhere else in the world. There's always a lot of lead time in movies. I mean, is this going to be a trilogy?
I think one of the things that, you know, Eric and I feel really strongly about with Force of Nature is that Australian audiences are the reason why Force of Nature's happened. They went and saw it, they loved it, they told their friends, they made it a big hit. And they probably have some ownership of why a sequel got made. Sequels don't happen, films don't happen easily, and this one did because people loved the first one. So I think we're taking a bit of a view, let's see how this one goes. It's very exciting being on the cusp of this massive release in Australia. And so watch this space. I mean, Jane Harper's one of our iconic writers, and her work will continue to be part of the canon of our national storytelling. So I'm sure there'll be more films to come.
Well, good luck with it. And Eric Bana and Robert Connolly, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks so much.
Lovely to chat to you.